In any era, creators will be inspired by the state of the world around them and have shared cultural experiences that may lead to like-minded ideas. Sometimes these concepts can be strikingly similar, such as the twin film phenomenon, where an unrelated, matching pair of movies are coincidentally released around the same time. It's apparent that, in any given time period, a social force can be so deeply ingrained in our collective consciousness that it inspires a number of creative works. One of the most prominent examples of this type of occurrence happened in 1999. That year, 5 critically acclaimed movies, The Matrix, American Beauty, Fight Club, Being John Malkovich, and Office Space, all followed an oddly similar format. In each of these films, the main character is an average Joe who works at a dull office job. Not satisfied with their unfulfilling lives, they make a drastic change and take a stand against societal norms. These films all share a fairly unified outlook at how disenchanted many people were with the safe, boring doldrums of the American lifestyle at that time. And the primary symbol for the cause of this angst was the office job. Now, I'm certainly not the first person to notice this trend. This topic has been discussed for years and was popularized by the YouTube channel Now You See It, where he dubbed this type of film as the Cubicle Movie. Watching these movies as companion pieces offers a fascinating look at the concerns of a time and place that was relatively peaceful. So if that world piques your interest like it does mine, let's be kind and rewind our tapes back to the Cubicle Rebellion of 1999. On August 11, 1992, Douglas Copeland, author of the novel Generation X, was being interviewed at the opening of the Mall of America in Minneapolis. Sensing he was unimpressed, the host remarked that Copeland must have found this brainless consumer spectacle stupid. But Copeland didn't feel that way at all, and replied the following: "I actually think the future generations are going to look at images of today and see them as a sort of golden age of American culture. The peace, the calm, the abundance, the bottomless goodwill of everyone here. I'm unsure it's going to last much longer, and I think we should appreciate it while it's here." Over 30 years later, this quote almost seems prophetic. Whether you were lucky enough to live through it or born after its end, many of us have a nostalgic fixation on the 1990s. And it's easy to see why. While it wasn't the utopia that we sometimes think of it as, the 90s was perhaps the last decade that Western culture could be described as stable and prosperous. The Cold War was over, the economy was good, technology was new and exciting, and everything seemed like it was on a positive trajectory. Yet, despite its many good qualities, this decade also hosted one of the strongest counterculture movements in recent memory. This spirit of disillusionment was captured in grunge music, satirical cartoons, and in films like Joel Schumacher's 1993 thriller, Falling Down, a movie that contained the striking image of an unassuming everyman in a white, collared shirt and tie taking a violent stand against society. Throughout the decade, this sort of rebellious media held a strong position in pop culture. And as life got more comfortable, the grievances that they addressed mostly fell at the top half of Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. All the while, this angst-filled movement had a universally despised enemy that was the perfect target for everyone's frustrations: the corporate sellout. Typically, our heroes were the free-spirited rebels who defied social conventions, and the consummate villains were those dastardly suits who served the man. It's quite apparent how these conditions eventually birthed the Cubicle Movie. In the years leading to the millennium, there was a steady stream of like-minded media dealing with Gen X's discontentment with modern life. But somehow, the level of the anti-cubicle sentiment found in 1999 was exceptional compared to any other year. So why exactly did that happen? I believe there are 2 reasons. First, while cubicles were around since the 1960s, by the late 90s they became more ubiquitous than ever due to computers and the internet. By then, the gray cubicle was an omnipresent symbol of a conformist system that people were growing tired of. Secondly, 1999 was arguably the year that the attitude era of the late 90s was at its peak. The cynical generation entering the workforce just wasn't drinking the corporate Kool-Aid anymore. When you account for these factors, in 1999 the office job was primed for a decisive deconstruction and people were crying out for it. And that's when the Cubicle Rebellion came into play. Now that we have an idea where this trend came from, let's talk about what its 5 movies had to say. In this discussion, I'll avoid major plot points, but spoilers are on. I'll start the analysis with arguably the most popular movie of the group, so strap in as we re-enter The Matrix. The Matrix offers the most general overview of the underlying themes found in the Cubicle Rebellion. Our first disgruntled office worker is a Gen X everyman named Neo. We first see him asleep at his computer as he receives a cryptic message telling him to wake up, which is fitting since recently Neo's been sleepwalking his way through life, feeling that something isn't right with the world. From the start, Neo somewhat lives on the fringe of society. He's not interested in lavish things and lives a Spartan lifestyle in a cramped apartment. He also moonlights as a hacker, doing deals for various shady clientele. What really brings him to life is his fascination with a mysterious conspiracy theory called the Matrix. Following a night out at a club, Neo is late for his job as a programmer at a software company. Because of this, he's scolded by his boss, who condemns his issue with authority and rebellious attitude. After that, we see his workspace, a maze of dull, gray cubicles. It's so generic that it's almost like he's in a simulation. These scenes tell us a lot about the prevailing attitude at that time. Even though Neo's technically in the wrong for being late, we have an inherent bias against his boss and his workplace. They embodied a conformist lifestyle that was everything we didn't want to be. Soon after, he's apprehended by a group of government suits who interrogate him. It's here that he meets Agent Smith, who's like a representation of the man. Smith is cold and overly formal, referring to Neo as Mr. Anderson in a way that feels dehumanizing. Smith offers Neo a choice: to continue his life as a respectable member of society or to rot in prison. It's here that Neo takes a stand, giving a middle finger to the system, a system that will still use him for its own ends. Once Neo finally meets Morpheus, he's given the choice to learn the truth. After taking the red pill, he's unplugged from the Matrix and learns that his entire life was a lie. At this point, the movie moves away from Neo's former mundane life. When he returns to the Matrix, he's one of the red pills who were everything cool at that time, a group of leather and sunglass-wearing rebels who fought the power. By joining their cause, Neo's life shifted from a meaningless existence to one with purpose. However, the film makes it clear that knowing the truth comes with a steep price. The real world isn't a fairy tale wonderland. It's a waking nightmare, totally devoid of the comforts we take for granted. It's a motif that we'll see a lot in these movies, that leaving the safe and boring path often requires personal sacrifice. In the last act of the film, Agent Smith confides in Morpheus an often referred to line, that the Matrix was based on the peak of human civilization, which occurred around 1999. It's telling about the state of the world at that time that the movie could so boldly make a statement like that and practically everyone would agree with it. Speaking of films that captured the spirit of America in 1999, perhaps none did it better than American Beauty. This Oscar-winning drama is a profound time capsule of the American middle-class lifestyle in the late 90s. The protagonist is a family man named Lester, a middle-aged office drone who's grown disenchanted with his milquetoast life. On the surface, he has it all. He and his wife have decent jobs, live in a nice neighborhood, have a lovely daughter, and all of the stuff you're supposed to want. Yet, for Lester, it's an empty and shallow existence. His marriage has been loveless for years. His daughter hates him and he has no idea how to talk to her. Nobody respects him. And on top of it all, he hates his job. Lester works as a magazine executive at a generic office, a position that gives him no fulfillment. To add to his dismay, the company recently hired an efficiency expert to decide who to keep and who to fire. Another stuffy, overbearing suit for us to hate. Lester's life changes after he becomes infatuated with his daughter's friend, a rare time when casting Kevin Spacey made a role less creepy. Seeing this schoolgirl dance awakens something in him that he hasn't felt in years. From then on, he decides to always put himself first and to live the life that he's always dreamed of. As a result, he quits his miserable job to work at a fast food restaurant. His departure is a satisfying backhand to the company, handing them an insulting letter and blackmailing them for a nice severance package. American Beauty was a resounding critical and commercial success, largely because it captured a nagging feeling that underpinned many middle-aged Americans at that time, which can be summed up as the following: I've worked so hard and this is all I have to show for it? Is this really all there is to life? When I first saw Lester's rebellion as a young man, I found it empowering. But as I'm growing closer to his age, I feel differently. While his journey of self-discovery led to some short-term excitement and personal growth, his selfish intentions ultimately hurt everyone around him. And while his wife was half to blame, the one who suffers for their mistakes is the daughter. In the end, while the film is certainly a critique of the vacuous nature of America's middle-class lifestyle, it's perhaps even more critical of the people who lived it. The movie's tagline calls the audience to look closer, not just to balk at how fake and empty life was, but also to appreciate the beauty around them. Lester seemed to realize that by the end, but it was too late. Just like it was too late for Jack to turn back at the end of Fight Club. Fight Club taps into the psychology of a generation of men who felt disillusioned with society at that time. This perspective is captured through Jack, another Joe Blow who despises his job. He works as a recall specialist in an automobile company, where he spends his days working at a dull office and inspecting horrific accidents. Every week is the same monotonous routine, which has made Jack a dull boy. Due to his miserable lifestyle, he develops a severe case of insomnia. He finds some relief by joining support groups under the false pretense that he's also sick. These groups give him a taste of genuine human connection, which temporarily cures his insomnia. But the jig is up when he spots another faker who reminds him of his own deception. Soon after, on an airplane, he meets an enigmatic agent of chaos named Tyler Durden, an exciting drifter whose entire existence is like a middle finger to the system. It's through his conversations with Tyler that Jack confronts why he and so many other men felt dissatisfied with their place in the world, that their generation was raised to believe they could be anything and ended up with mediocre, unchallenging lives, that they were brainwashed by society and lost sight of what really mattered, and that they were living in a forgettable time in history with no new frontiers to conquer. Thoughts like these made this generation feel like their lives lacked any meaning. From then on, Jack joins Tyler's rebellion. We see him being a nuisance at work, no longer complying with its customs. Interestingly, none of the office scenes give us a reason to hate his workplace. There's no abuse of power or betrayal, and his boss seems like a decent guy. We're expected to inherently hate these environments much like Jack does. And whether or not the boss is a stand-up guy, he's still a proxy of the system. So when Jack extorts him, it evokes a sense of triumph instead of disgust. The movie preys on our desire to root for the free-spirited rebels. And while the story is certainly critical of modern society, we also see the glaring cracks in Tyler's anarchistic ideology. After some time, the Fight Club devolves into a cult that causes wanton mayhem and destruction in the name of social reform. All the while, its members are reduced to a collection of nameless clones. In the end, Tyler's mission becomes somewhat of a distorted reflection of the oppressing world that's fighting against. We can surmise that, while Jack taking action in his life led to some positive outcomes, his descent into his delusions had severe consequences. Which is something that can also be said for the protagonist of being John Malkovich. This movie gives us a totally unique perspective on the Cubicle Rebellion. For starters, its main character named Craig doesn't start out as an angst-filled office worker. Rather, he lives the life of a starving artist. Craig's an aspiring puppeteer who crafts expressionist plays with his puppets. However, this pursuit is going nowhere. In the world of art, only a fortunate few can make it, and he isn't one of them. Due to the economic realities of his situation, he's forced to find a day job to pay the bills. In the search, he finds an ad looking for someone with fast hands, a role he would be well suited for. So he heads in for an interview. The office scenes in the movie are humorously over the top to show how uncomfortable these kind of environments are for someone like Craig. To begin with, he looks totally out of place in his thrown together business attire. The workplace is strangely located on the building's 7th floor, with a low roof that creates a claustrophobic feeling. A space that's constantly bearing down on everyone in it. The rude secretary doesn't even try to understand him, and the orientation video is total BS. Despite all that, while working in an office isn't the life he dreamed of, Craig doesn't seem to mind it as much as the others. Finding a job temporarily drags him out of the gutter, and is the only remotely positive choice he makes in the movie. However, most of this newfound optimism comes from his crush on a pretty coworker named Maxine. Compared to his monotonous office work, his home life is even more depressing. He and his wife are totally on the outs and don't understand each other's needs. They live in a dark apartment with various wacky animals that are like a distraction from their gloomy existence. The only place Craig finds any comfort is with his puppets, which gives him a form of escape. All in all, while the film pokes fun at the mundanities of cubicle life, it's clear that the job is the least of Craig's problems. His issues stem from his deeply held insecurities and self-loathing. These problems get progressively worse after he finds a portal into the mind of actor John Malkovich, which gives him the escape he always wanted. A fantasy that's allure becomes all-consuming and leads him down a path to ruin. This surreal aspect of the film is analogous to the many methods we use to numb the pain of our lives and how damaging they can be. Something that feels scarily relevant in today's world of widespread parasocial relationships. With that said, it's time we move on to the movie that's like the face of the Cubicle Rebellion: Office Space. In many ways, Office Space is the definitive cubicle movie. While the other films touched on these white-collar jobs, Office Space dissects them to their very essence. The audience proxy this time is a guy named Peter, an average Joe who works for a company called Initech, a place that's become his own personal hell. Everything about the company's office is portrayed with meticulous realism and detail. For anyone who's worked in a gray cubicle maze, Peter's experiences are painfully relatable. The bureaucracy, the annoying coworkers, faulty printers, pointless pep talks, clueless consultants, tedious paperwork, phony slogans, the list goes on. Peter spends these soul-sucking days pretending to be busy and doing the minimum amount of work necessary to not be bothered by his various bosses. The manager who's the main source of his agony as a man named Lumberg. Despite simply being a VP at an office, this guy is one of the most memorable antagonists in movie history. He speaks in a faux polite, condescending way, belittling everyone around him. Under this polite facade, Lumberg treats his subordinates with passive-aggressive contempt, inconveniencing and mistreating them by whatever means he can get away with. In response, Peter does whatever he can to avoid his boss's attention. In a session with a hypnotherapist, Peter unloads this now iconic line that encapsulates his bleak perspective, that every day since he started working has been the worst day of his life. During this session, he's given the impetus to let go and not give a damn about his job anymore. Unexpectedly, Peter's newfound backbone and devil-may-care attitude improves his standing in the company. While Peter's success by way of doing nothing is done for comedic purposes, it speaks to how irrational promotional decisions often are. Unlike Peter, his friends are willing to tolerate the job for the comfortable life it affords them, but somehow they're the ones who end up on the chopping block. This example is one of many that shows why people truly hated these kind of companies. In spite of the good economic conditions, the company-to-employee dynamic wasn't ideal, and the idea of the forever job was becoming a thing of the past. You were just a cog in the machine, and the company would chew you up and spit you out as it saw fit. Therefore, we feel no sympathy when Peter and his buddies hatch a scheme to steal from Initech to improve their lives. With all that said, watching these films was a good reflection on the zeitgeist of that era. And so, it's time I finalize this analysis with my concluding thoughts. Watching the 5 Cubicle movies in short order led me to some expected and some surprising conclusions. Starting with the obvious, this trend showed how negatively people thought about the corporate sellout life at the turn of the millennium. These films all portrayed the office as dull, bleak, oppressive environments that offered a life of mind-numbing mediocrity. As a result, our disgruntled heroes all rebelled to give their lives a sense of purpose. In addition, these jobs weren't presented as the reliable careers that we might think they were. We see consultants casually firing people with little justifiable reasons and cold-hearted bosses treating their employees as expendable drones. To enter these companies, you had to conform to the system, but it in turn had no loyalty to you. Despite this unified, cynical outlook on the cubicle life, these films all made it clear that donning the white shirt and tie is a choice. As a result, they feel just as critical of the 5 lead characters as they do of their work environments. For all of these malcontent men, their job was never the true source of their problems. Instead, their cubicles were more like self-prescribed prisons. Aside from maybe Craig, who really needed the job, the rest fell into the office life because it was the safe choice. Because of that, they had no one to blame but themselves for their miserable circumstances. After taking the plunge to change their lives, the results for each of these men were mixed. Of the 5, Neo's the only one who had a deserved, positive outcome, which makes sense since he's the only virtuous person of the lot. Peter also gets a happy ending, but realistically should have gone to prison. The other three all basically get the bad ending. To put a bow on this thought experiment, I believe the overarching message of the Cubicle Rebellion was this. While an office job can be soul-destroying, most of us end up there through our own decisions. You can either choose the proverbial blue stapler or the red stapler. One offers a safe and boring existence, and the other an exciting life filled with hardships and struggle. If I was a miserable office worker in the late 90s, I truly believe that watching these movies would make me reconsider my life choices. But unbeknownst to every disaffected office worker in America, things were about to change whether they wanted them to or not. Which brings me to my final query. What happened to the Cubicle Rebellion? The answer to this question is quite obvious. To put it simply, 9/11 happened. After September 11, 2001, the idea of a boring office job being the primary complaint of your life felt like a joke. But while it stepped down a few rungs on the list of pressing societal issues, the anti-cubicle sentiment never fully went away. Movies like The Incredibles, shows like The Office, and too many others to mention kept the spirit alive. All things considered, the desire to escape your dull life for greener pastures will always be a core part of the human experience. Rather than ceasing to exist, the main sentiments found in the Cubicle Rebellion evolved with the times. For instance, in the online discourse, the anti-work and quiet quitting movements have gained a lot of traction. These trends have a lot in common with the Cubicle Rebellion, but with a shifted focus on the stress of working in poor economic conditions. Additionally, the gray cubicle isn't really the force that it once was. Most modern-day companies have adopted the more progressive open office model, which for introverts like me could be described as one of the 7 layers of hell. Ironically, many people who work in these new age offices would kill for their own little piece of cubicle purgatory. With that said, let's go back to the time period in question. The people who lived and worked in the late 90s had to deal with the hand they were given, and life was never perfect. So while I do view that time with some playful envy, seeing it in motion is also quite tragic. This period of relative peace was about to come to a screeching halt, and absolutely nobody saw it coming. In an era where we've experienced one life-altering disaster after another, I think we're long overdue for an age where a boring office job can be our biggest problem again. I just hope that it lasts a little longer next time.